Good evening. My name is Sam Davis with the Michigan High School Athletic Association, and I am pleased to be here with a panel tonight as we discuss race and bias in sports officiating. Now, certainly this is a topic that has been around for a while. It is not brand new, but it was important for us to come together with this learned group of individuals to talk about it a little bit tonight. My background, I've been a wrestling official for quite a number of years. I had the opportunity to work at levels all the way up to the collegiate level, and I had even the opportunity to do a little bit of baseball umpiring for a while through the MHSAA, and those are the sports that I have. I currently work with the association and working with officials with dealing with reports and recruitment and retention, also working with the wrestling program and the finals that are done there. So we're going to have this opportunity to hear from the panel, and each panelist is going to go ahead and introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves, and we'll move on. So why don't we go ahead and start first with Tiffany.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Galladay, and I'm an official with MHSAA. I officiate girls competitive cheerleading, and I've been officiating cheer for about 12 years. I am also the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Rochester Community Schools. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Chris?
Hey, good evening. I'm Chris Ferguson. I'm a basketball official with the MHSAA. Have been for about 15 years now. Happy to be here as well. I've been a board member and trainer with the Genesee County Coaches and Officials Association for a number of years as well. And my career being in law enforcement, this particular topic has been obviously at the forefront of a lot of issues there as well. And I look forward to the conversations today.
Thanks, Chris. Rico?
Hi, I'm Rico Phillips, and I've been an MHSAA ice hockey official for well over 20 years. I began my career in ice hockey as an official 1986, so I'm in my just finished my 34th season in the sport. As you can imagine, this topic is a very hot topic in our sport, and so I'm glad to have the opportunity. I do represent the Flint Ice Hockey Referees Association, the Livonia Ice Hockey Officials Group, and currently I serve as the Director of Cultural Diversity and Inclusion for the Ontario Hockey League.
Very good. Thank you, Rico. Debbie?
My name is Dr. Debbie Carabes-Betts, and I've been official since 1974. I started with Title IX in women's sports, being one of the first coaches to coach women in high school. Have been with Michigan High School since then, either as a coach or an official. I am currently a member of an association where I am the secretary, treasurer, and recruiter. I have coached boys track, girls track, boys swimming, and girls volleyball. That's pretty much it. I've seen it all. I've seen all the changes of all sports in the state, and of course I am the oldest one here.
Well, we don't know about that.
I was just going to say.
Thank you for all of these sports that you've worked with. Excited to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike?
My name is Mike Conlon. I'm an assigner here at the high school level locally in Lansing. Retired official, worked for about 35 years, mostly at the college level at the end. I assign high school basketball and football. Also assign, or I'm a coordinator at the college level in men's and women's basketball and baseball. And I'm also the executive director of the Capital Area Officials Association. And appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And last but not least, Anthony Stone.
Hello, my name is Anthony Stone. I am a wrestling official. I've been officiating for about 9 years. I was trained by our moderator, Mr. Sam Davis. I've been a wrestling coach for about 16 years from youth through high school. I am a trained sociologist. I have a master's degree from the University of Memphis. I'm currently working on my PhD in sociology at the University of Cincinnati, where I study and research race, racism, identity, and the media. And I would say that although I have training from these institutions, and the knowledge I will share will be as an official, a coach, and a sociologist, the views expressed will be my own.
Good. Thank you, Anthony. Certainly, you can see from and hear from the panel, we have an outstanding array of individuals who will be sharing with us some real good insight. And without further ado, let's get into it. I want to start by saying that racial bias has been a controversial topic in youth sports for decades. And each generation has dealt with racial bias issues in one way or another, and today's generation is no different. Some would argue that racism and the bias attached to it is at a historical low. And when looking exclusively at explicit bias, this may be true. However, there's another form of bias that is perhaps running as rampant as ever, and that's implicit bias. And implicit bias is not malicious and can be entirely accidental. However, this does not mean that it should be ignored. Implicit bias will be only contained and eliminated if we acknowledge their existence and attempt to get rid of them. And so with that kind of lead-in, our first question is really tied to that. And our first question comes and says this, that sports are meant to be the great equalizer, and that race should not be a factor in how the game is played or officiated. Are discussions like this actually fueling controversy in this area? Should we or should we not have this panel discussion, and explain why? Who'd like to talk about whether or not we should have this panel discussion and why?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
Well, without question, we need to have discussions like this. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in society, which is a reflection of sport, is our uneasiness around each other and the uneducation and naivety about each other's culture. And why does that matter? Because when we go onto the field of competition, we're still people first. We're not just athletes, we're not just students, we're people. And that component requires us to really delve in deep to find out, are there issues that we need to address, and how do we properly address them so that everybody feels included, not just one section or another section, but everybody is brought to the table. So this is a perfect table to bring us together, in my opinion.
Anyone else want to speak to it? Mike?
Yeah, I think the one thing that probably over the last 16 months that I've seen and tried to have some impact in is the implicit piece, or the impact. It is no longer acceptable for any of us to have the excuse of, well, that was not my intent. Making a comment, trying to be funny, not understanding each other, culturally, that's not an excuse anymore. It's just so easy for us to reach out to each other. We have a panelist that's down in Cincinnati right now, and we kind of laughed about the fact that he was that far away, but he's not. He's right there, and he's a guy that I can ask a question to right now. I think the bottom line is we need to all understand that, the things that we say, whether we intend or not, is not the reality. It's the impact that we have on everyone, whether it's race, gender, religion, it doesn't matter. And we've got to start thinking that way, and the only way we can do that is by having discussions. So I applaud the MHSAA for having this panel discussion. It's an outstanding start.
Well, Debbie, do you think this fuels controversy by doing something like this, by having a panel
I
discussion?
think controversy is good for everyone because it leads to knowledge. Information brought out will lead to the knowledge and the understanding, and we will get to the root of the problem, not just see the flower of the problem.
Anyone else want to speak on that?
I'll just, I'll just add that, panel discussions like this are great, and they definitely promote growth as an organization for the MHSA, and hopefully this message spreads, from the Upper Peninsula to the Lower Peninsula for all officials and whoever else may have a chance to see it. But hopefully it's an opportunity for anybody that does watch it that's not here today to take a good look at themselves of what am I doing to promote diversity in my area? What am I doing to help erase some of those implicit biases that I see not only with myself but other people that I come into contact with, and how can we promote change, excuse me, not just within this organization but within society.
So conversations, discussions like this are definitely necessary, and there are a few reasons. People would like, I'm sure all of us could agree that we would like racism, prejudice, different phobias to disappear, but not talking about them is not the way to make them go away. The fact of the matter is that this country was founded on racism, and that racism hasn't disappeared. There are still areas of this country that are highly segregated in housing, education. There are studies that show that candidates with the exact same credentials with racialized names versus traditionally Eurocentric names show that even criminals with European sounding names will get a job over an educated person of color. So just because we want it to go away doesn't mean it's gone. Prejudice still exists, racism still exists, and the only way that we can get to the bottom of it and start to have solutions is by discussions like this.
Thank you, Anthony. And again, our questioner talked about that sports are supposed to be the great equalizer. How do you see sports being an equalizer as we look at racism and bias? How is that? Not to say that the questioner is wrong on that, but that's what they're posing or saying, is that it's an equalizer. Go ahead.
I'd like to address that. It's an equalizer if we show these athletes what the opportunities are. And again, I will go back to the 70s where you didn't see a lot of women officials. Today, you still don't see a lot of women officials in the sports that I officiate. A child needs to see somebody that they can say, you look like me. I mean, you see advertisements now saying that they look like me. They need to see that. They need to have an identity to look at. We don't see that in the state of Michigan that much in all sports. In some sports we do, but in a lot of sports, we will never see a black person officiating at a state level. We just haven't seen it. So how do these athletes ever see someone that looks like them or that doesn't look like them but can call a fair and honest game, creating a fair and safe environment for them? That's the key to having people understand that there is no barrier.
Well, let's move on to question number 2. And I want to share with you that in high school sports, a typical referee does not begin a game with bias for or against a certain team. We don't have any skin in the game either way. But as the game continues, sometimes there are multiple factors that sway the favoritism of officials. Anything from the coach's behavior to the rowdiness of the crowd can alter the referee's viewpoint of a team, prompting them to call penalties that they might have let slide earlier in the game. So with that mindset, the question is this: how do current officials recognize their own biases? And if they are implicit, how does one know that they're correcting their own biases? So again, the question is, how do you recognize your own biases? And we talk about how that game can sway based on some things that are said, how people behave. Who can speak to that?
I can speak to it a
All
little
right,
bit.
thanks, Tiffany.
I think one of the biggest things about recognizing your own biases is to be self-reflective, and then to also have a critical friend. So it's important to ask, how do you think I did? What do you think about this? It's important to have that person to bounce out ideas back off of. And then also when you are confronted, it's the way in which you respond that really matters. So are you defensive? Are you fragile? Or do you take the time to stop and listen? I know that we talked a little bit about intention versus impact, and there's a big difference. So what we intend to do is not always the result of the impact. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're open-minded and that we listen. So it may not have been your intention, and it may not have been the way you thought it came out or what you thought you said, but it's important to understand how that impacts others, especially others who are unlike you. So I think the key is listening and then having that critical friend and being self-reflective, because no, you're not going to always know when you're biased. We all have bias, all of us. But it's what you do with that that matters most.
I like that, and that critical friend. I mean, that takes some courage to be that critical friend, because relationships are in the balance. And if someone sees something that they feel is inappropriate, what are you willing to risk in order to address that? But I apologize for digressing as you brought that out, but anyone else want to talk about recognizing your own biases and how do you know if you're correcting them?
I'll add, excuse me, I'll add that, from a competitive game standpoint, if you find yourself in a highly contested matchup where you are getting that sort of volatile interaction, whether it's from the crowd, the players from a particular team, a coach from a particular team, and you're finding that your interactions and your engagement with those particular players and team personnel are becoming more and more volatile, and you're addressing them in a certain manner, but then the other team on the end of the court, you're very cordial with them, you're friendly almost, laughing and engaging with them during free throws or something to that effect. It's something that, as Tiffany mentioned, that someone on your crew hopefully is picking up on that, and maybe at a dead ball opportunity, a timeout opportunity, say, hey, just my perception of what I see going on, maybe just try to cut the friendliness with one coach if you're going to be issuing out penalties that you have been with the other coach. But that's the time of, well, if that's what he sees, what does everyone else see, right? He's on my team out here, in theory. What are these people that aren't on my team seeing, and what do I need to do to correct that from this point forward? And then taking that into your next game where maybe you do the best you can to remain more neutral on the court and try to leave those personal vendettas that you're getting established in the game aside, and just each play is a play, each interaction is a new interaction, and try to move on from there.
You made an important point there. I hadn't thought about it. This critical friend, they're supposed to be on your team. They're supposed to be on your side. And if they see this and are recognizing it, what are those who are not necessarily enamored with you, what are they seeing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? So, very excellent points, both Tiffany and Chris. Anyone else want to speak to that before we move on?
Yeah, I have. Please, thank you, Anthony.
Yeah. This reminds me of colorblind racism, which is theorized as how racism. And essentially, it's not like the old racism of calling names and holding strong prejudice. It's holding implicit racial views about different groups. And the key to recognizing your own racial biases or any biases is to sit down as an official or just as a general citizen and use that critical frame that Tiffany talked about and think about the things that you maybe have internalized or the things that you think about different groups. Again, this country is founded on different isms and different ideas. So you have to sit down and think about the different nasty things that you may think or that you may have heard. How do I feel about women? How do I feel about sexual minorities? How do I feel about immigrants? How do I feel about people of color? And you have to hash those ideas out with yourself, maybe with a counselor, maybe in a talking group with friends. But first, it starts with yourself. Do you have implicit biases? How will they come out? Why are they coming out? You have to deal with those things within yourself, and that's how you can correct them. And if you can't correct them alone, then you should seek professional help. Talk to experts in the area. Talk to friends. Maybe if you're religious, talk to your pastor, your imam, etc. And work those things out before you take them with you to the match, to the game, to the meet.
What are some of the things that, when we talk about these implicit biases, what are some of the things that person who may not be clear about the fact that they do have biases, what is it that they might see in a game similar to what you were talking about, Chris, or other? Are there other examples of stuff that the official who doesn't know or isn't recognizing or doesn't have that critical friend, how do they recognize and then begin to correct? Certainly Anthony talks about some sort of professional help or support, absolutely. But if you don't recognize it and there's no one telling you, how do we address that?
I think this comes with associations that do their training. I think training through the associations is a vital key to help to understand the officials that are in your association. Getting conversations going, having training, in the training itself, what can occur, how would you react? A lot of role playing is very important for officials before they even get onto the court or to the field. I think that's critical, to know what's going to happen, what's the possibilities of happening before you walk in there. What happens when you walk into a regional and this is an all-white team and this is an all-black team? The level should be the same, but in many cases it's not. And so how do you prepare yourself for this? 1, go over your rules again. 2, go into your heart. What is the spirit of this game? To make this game the safest, fairest opportunity for these children. And it starts with the pre-meeting with the coaches and the captains. And you need to tell the captains, listen to what I am saying. This is what I want you to do when you go back to your teams. Tell your teams that this is how this is going to be run. I am going to call it fair. I may mess up on something, but it was no intent. I think they have to feel that they are safe with you as an official.
Very good, very good. I really like what you said about associations and getting the associations involved and knowing that this is a critical topic for you to discuss. I would dare say, and I could certainly be wrong, that the majority of associations are not talking about this. Certainly talking about your pregame, you're talking about your rules, but are they talking about some of the socialization factors? You know, are they talking about biases? Are they talking about that impression? We certainly talk about making sure that you come in looking professional, that you're kempt, that you're not smoking, you're not da-da-da. But are we going beyond that? And so maybe thank you for bringing that out. That's really important, especially when we're going back, Tiffany, I'm talking about where's your critical friend? You just pointed out where that can begin to develop if it's not already there.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Also, not waiting around for your association to provide training, because a lot of this is life training. So there's, as I think someone said earlier, there's been so much that has happened over the past 16 months. There are so many books out here that you can read. There are so many webinars you can attend. Most of them are free. There are so many things if you seek it out for yourself, because a lot of this, like Anthony said, is self-work. So it's important for us to not sit around and wait for an association to hold something for us to then go and join it. And it's going to take more than 1, 2, or 3 times to attend something to really start to internalize something new. And we learn that, right? Like there's 21 days to break a bad habit is what they say. Some people say more than that. So it's going to take more than that. And you have to be indebted to this yourself. So I strongly believe that yes, our association should be providing training, but so much of this is self-work, and it can apply to all facets of your life.
And I think you circled back to something you said early on in terms of that self-reflection. You talked about that early on, and Anthony certainly reinforced that this is, you have to want to do this. You have to expose yourself. You have to be willing to expose yourself and examine yourself. Is there something that I'm missing? Most of us like to think that, as my sister would say, we're all that in a bag of chips, but when you walk in it, you may not be, but are you willing to take a good look at yourself? Well, let's move on a little bit, because I want to be, absolutely, Mike.
Real quick, Mayor. So one of the things I think from an officiating standpoint that helps us is we're in the integrity business right off the bat. So that doesn't mean that everybody that walks in the door to register as an MHSA official is of the utmost integrity. But I think most of us recognize from a young age, watching it on TV, all the people that do it at all the levels that it's done, we're in the integrity business. So I think we have a little bit of an advantage from the standpoint that we are getting, for the most part, good people at the end of the day. And then I do think it does depend a lot on what the associations do, and do we train? Do we give people the ability to Do you manage the conflict that they know is coming? You know, you make the comment about the black team and the white team playing. That happens all the time in every area in the state of Michigan. And we've all got bias, whether it's, you know, I'm watching the Today Show this morning and it's bias about whether it's a cookout or a barbecue. And these are just people on TV, so we have bias for everything. But we're in the integrity business. And if we recognize that we have to come in and work on our biases, and I think from the standpoint of a white official or a white executive director, I will tell you, Sam, that last September in this building, when you could only, I believe it was September, when you could only have 10 people indoors, the Capital Area Officials Association had 10 people in this room, and it was 5 blacks and 5 whites. And we had the kind of discussions that we're talking about having right now, and asking the question, you know, what can we do? Are we as the assigner that's white, am I putting out roadblocks that I'm not even aware of? Again, stuff that I don't realize that I'm doing. So we can do it, but like I said, I think we need to make sure that we understand that the people that we're dealing with are pretty good people for the most part, and you know, everybody goes out to do the best job they can. And in some reality, not only does the training need to be from an officiating standpoint, but the training needs to be from a coaching standpoint. So it's not a situation where, because of the way they perceive something, automatically we go to there's some form of bias. It could just honestly be that I got the play wrong. No bias, I just got the play wrong. I guessed wrong, the point came up wrong, I didn't know the rule. There are lots of things that go into getting plays right and wrong, which is our #1 job as an official. So I think not only do we need to make sure that we are educating within our group, but we have to also try to educate the people that we are providing the service for.
I want to echo the last few points as well. Thinking of my experience, one thing that I remember Sam taught me as a training official, and then even when I started doing varsity matches, was the rule book doesn't change between levels, and that applies to identities as well. The rule book is no different for different races or areas or JV, varsity. The rule book is the same. And so something that was said that I think is important, and I just want to double down on it, is that there has to be consistency in the training that we receive. So don't just have these conversations once or twice. Have them often, and have them believed across the leadership, across the trainers of the associations. Tiffany said something about reflexivity. You definitely have to be thinking. So I'm thinking of being blessed with the experience of coaching in Michigan. I now coach down here in Cincinnati, officiating in Michigan. I haven't officiated in Ohio, but one thing about Cincinnati is that the Cincinnati Public School District is majority Black school district. And wrestling in Ohio is bigger in the middle and in the north. And that means that cities like Dayton, which it has a lot of majority Black teams, in Cincinnati, have to travel for competition. And I'm reminded of the different stories that I've heard coaching with My Way, coaching at MHSAA, coaching here, the different things that different coaches will say, white coaches will say, Black coaches will say. And think about some of the things I've heard the officials here say, because I think that they have a different experience than some officials in Michigan, because Michigan seems to be a little bit more mixed, especially in mid-Michigan. I can't speak for Northern Michigan and UP, but I recall hearing officials ask or tell stories, you know, when they're having their sidebars in the coaches meeting about, this coach said that I'm racist, this coach said that I'm making racist calls. And that's where reflexivity comes in. If you keep hearing the same thing, you have to replay how the situation went. How did the meet go? How did the tournament go? How did the match go? If you keep hearing this, you have to ask yourself, was I making implicit calls? Was I biased against these Black kids, against these brown kids? If the answer is no, then maybe there's some other work you need to do. But if you keep hearing it and you're realizing it, that's where some of those critical frames in the training is going to come in, and why it's important that we all are having these conversations within associations, the entire MHSAA, so that we're doubling down and making sure that we're addressing the issue.
Very good. Points well made. Points well made. Implicit bias, it refers to attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions in an unconscious manner. Implicit biases are difficult to measure and define within the individual, as they often go undetected by definition. So the questioner wanted to know this: what's the best way for officials to handle coaches, and Anthony was alluding to it, who allude to your racial bias in your officiating? Or what if a coach explicitly or implicitly refers to you as a racist? How do you address that? How do you handle that situation with that coach? Mike?
Unacceptable. In most instances, I'm going to say that the person that, if we're talking about saying that to me, the person that says that to me probably hasn't ever met me. And again, we're going to talk about the fact that I'm a racist over a play or a call, and in most cases, most coaches aren't going to understand why I called or who called what they called. For example, it happened last Saturday at a basketball officiating camp. We had 2 white guys and a black guy refereeing a game. Probably the majority of the kids on the court for both teams were black kids, but there was a white coach and a black coach and some white kids. There was a play that happened in the paint. I'm the observer. I'm the guy running the camp, but I'm also the observer on the court. The black official on the baseline blows a foul. And when I went to talk to him, I said, look, we don't want your whistle to be the whistle that comes on that play. We want that to come from the center of the trail. And I explained why. Perfect. 3 minutes later, the same play happens again. He doesn't call a foul. One of the white guys calls a foul. The black coach, who had gotten a technical foul earlier in the game, is now yelling that it's racial because the black guy standing closest to the play didn't blow his whistle, which meant there was no foul. When in reality, that official who paid to come to camp, who paid to get some knowledge, I applaud because he got the knowledge and used it within 3 minutes, which is not easy to do. And as it happened, before any of the issues became the issue, I actually stepped out on the court and looked at him and said, perfect. Did you have a foul? He said, yeah. I said, but the other 2 guys had the better look. They were the primary. He says, I get it. I said, perfect, dude. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Next thing you know, 30 seconds later, another technical foul because the coach won't give it up, saying that the black official didn't call it, so it must be racial. So now we have an ejection. And this coach has never seen these 2 white officials in his life. And now we have it become racial. Now, I don't get it because I'm not, that's not me. I understand that we're going to have that. And we talked a lot about how we could have maybe helped that situation before he got to the point where he got. So I think, again, that becomes a training piece and a game management piece and a coach management piece. But I think coaches need to understand, as well as, I'm not allowed to, after the fact, when you rate me a 5, to call the MHSA and say, well, that's a racist rating. I don't get that option. So I don't understand why a coach, allowed by his administration, would get the option to say that. Any coach, not black versus white versus black, Native American, whatever, women versus male. If we've got 10 girls playing girls basketball, we don't have enough women officials to have all the girls basketball games refereed by all female officials. So I think we've got to educate that group as well, that that's not acceptable, in my opinion.
I'd just like to segue from that just because there's this blanket statement of you're racist, that's not the only way that can be phrased to make those same indications. The same coach that's been mentioned already, there's other coaches like him that, and maybe her as well, he or she, you go into an environment where yes, you're black, predominantly black versus predominantly white, and you make a foul call and you hear we knew that calls like that were coming when we came here, or we knew that we weren't going to get the benefit of the call coming here. And it's not that direct statement of you're a racist or that was racially motivated, but it's leading towards that. And if you address that early on, then you can hopefully prevent getting from the full-blown you're racist and sort of creating a bigger scene or mockery of the game. But you have to, as an official, be aware of if a coach is saying that and he's saying it to his kids, what's going to happen from there. It's only going to increase. It's only going to get more volatile if we don't handle it right away.
And how do you handle that? And Debbie alluded to this early on, and you talked about it too, Chris, in terms of that pregame and talking with kids and letting you know, hey, I'm here to be fair. We may make mistakes. That it is not intentional. And of course, Tiffany, I go back to your intentionality in terms of whether it was intentional, but it's the end result. How do we address that? Because now you have a volatile situation, and you may have already had a pre-meet discussion, and there's still that appearance. You hear it from the parent. Parents weren't involved in the pre-meet, so they're saying, "Hey, yeah, that's what happens whenever you go here. We heard about this. Da 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 da." The coach, who's supposed to be trained and obviously supporting the officials and trying to make sure that the playing field is one that is level and that kids feel like they're being treated fairly. It may be caught up in the I've got to present for my parents and go along with it. And kids are sitting there watching this and trying to figure out, is this a racist environment? Is it not? And when do you address that? Because is that the time now to address it? How much time do you have to address it? Rico, where are you on this?
The reason I've been so quiet is because, to be quite honest with you, I'm an anomaly in my sport, so I don't deal with the same types of biases, right? So I'm not considered a racist by in my call because every competitor on the ice is white, every coach is white. So I find myself trying to find context to relate to, so I apologize for not speaking up a little bit more because you probably think, what are you coming here for? But what I am doing is taking in the conversation because these are the types of things like in my other job with the Ontario Hockey League, these things are being talked about. I don't want to share too much OHL stuff,
Sure.
but it's the same level. So what we've been able to do in the OHL is open up these, what I call courageous conversations. That's one of the terms we use in diversity inclusion, but what it's done is it's created opportunities for kids to, young people, because they're in the high school age group, so it's relevant, between the ages of 16 and 20. They're able to ask for the first time questions that they've never been able to ask. They're able to get an insight as to what it's like to be a person of color. And by the same token, I'm able to share with them ways that they can come outside. Like, it's no one's fault where they're born and raised at, right? If you're born and raised in an all-white community, you don't have black friends. It's just the way it is. But it is incumbent upon us as leaders and educators to make sure that young people know that they have to look outside of their boxes. So when they go into environments where they're playing other teams of color or different, maybe you see players wearing hijabs or something along those lines that really stand out in a sport, and you have to make sure that that we as again, as leaders, take a look at how do we further educate, come outside these small communities so that we all come together. So again, I apologize because I'm trying to say, I made many calls, but I've never been called a racist. Now, by the same token, things have come the other way. So I think we'll find context in that later in the discussion about how I've had to deal with racism as an official in an all-white sport.
All right, very good. And certainly that perspective is critical for us, an African American official in a predominantly white sport. So you're right, you're not going to be singled out as making racist calls.
Right.
Oh yeah, really? What advantage to who?
Right.
But
exactly.
I want to move on because we have a number of questions, and I want to do as much justice as we can within the hour that we have allotted. And I know Brenda said if we need to go over a minute or two, we can certainly do that. But and the discussions are great. Thank you. I mean, I'm really feeling really good about the stuff that I'm hearing, and I want to repeat the importance of it being multifaceted in terms of addressing this. It's not just the officials, it's not just the coaches, you know, it's got to be the parents, it has to be community, and the need to, excuse me, visit and revisit and visit and revisit and deal with the elephant in the room. Don't ignore the elephant, deal with the elephant in the room. And certainly, to use the phrase that my friend Dan Hutchison here used quite often, the only way to get this elephant eaten is one bite at a time. And that takes time. You can't get it, we're not gonna change it overnight. But if we are not consistently moving in that direction, then we're moving backwards. And if we're standing still, I really feel like we're moving backwards. But let me go to the next question. With the majority of MHSA officials being white, 80%, what are things that majority officials might do, even unwittingly, that adversely affects their minority crewmates? What do you, as a majority official, do that might adversely affect your minority crewmates? And again, these are questions from our constituents. May not be a whole lot of conversation on it, but if it's something you can speak to, let's speak to it. If not, we'll move on.
When I saw this question, oh, sorry, Anthony. I just got a real quick point. When I saw this question, I expanded it further and thought, what are we doing to crewmates that we just don't know, period? Okay, so if I show up to a game with my best buddy that we've reffed together for 10 years, and if he's watching this, eventually he'll know who he is, but if we go onto a game with someone that we're unfamiliar with, what are we doing to, for lack of a better term, segregate ourselves from him out on the court? And it goes beyond race. It goes to an openness and inclusion for everyone. And obviously it can come off more stern or more obvious if it is a single minority official on a crew, but it comes back to we just need to break down all of those barriers, all of those walls, and open up and become friendly with people and just get to know them and bring them into our environment.
And that does go back, and Anthony, we're going to you, but someone earlier said, getting to know folks. You can't just be out there and be in your own silo and think that things are going to change. Getting to know folks, getting to know how they feel. I mean, that question, you think about that. If you go into an environment and you and your best buddy hang together, and that other person's not included, even though that was not an intentional thing because it's black or white, just because it's my bud, we feel comfortable here, we do our things together. What's the perception? What does that look like? What does that feel like, to be out there, okay? And you probably experienced this in terms of the hockey because you're working in crews and you.
So I was waiting for this question. I was just waiting for the next question. So I was doing.
Sorry, Anthony, we'll get to you.
As I told you, I've been doing refereeing ice hockey for 34 seasons. So when you walk back in time without going through a history lesson, I was coming up through the 90s, and where microaggressions were the way we spoke to each other and it's the way we communicated. I immediately felt as if I was, I don't want to say not welcome, but definitely it was a running joke that I was refereeing hockey. And I was new to the sport as well, so I didn't skate very well when I first started. I wasn't long before, a coach called me over on a call I blew and called me the N-word. And I was quite young at that time, and I didn't know really what I got myself into as far as the sport of ice hockey. I love the sport, so much passion and skill that makes our sport special. You can run and jump, but can you skate, right? So that's what makes our sport really special to me and everybody that's involved with it. One of the things that really started to rub me in a strange way was my partners and the microaggressions that they would share with me. Things like, hey, before the opening face-off, don't forget the puck goes down, it's not jump ball. Things like that. So as a way for me to cope, when I came into a locker room with a fresh crew of people that I didn't know, I look back and I'm really ashamed of myself and my race, for my race, that I would make the first joke about me being black so that I would ease the tension in the room, right? So then they didn't have to wonder, is he cool? Can he say this? And then all of a sudden, depending on the group, it all laid out. Then we got to see who they really were, which then I was like, I want to be skating with these guys. But over time, in the last several years, now I've gotten on and I've been able to referee some great people. I've refereed quarterfinals and semifinal games. I'm yet to do a finals game, but that's coming, I believe. I'm still working at it in my career. Maybe today's a good day. But anyways, my point is that over time I've seen things evolve, and I've seen less of that kind of chatter in the locker rooms. I've seen more acceptance of me when they first meet me. But I'll give you a first-hand experience from just last season. I came into a locker room I knew one of the officials and I didn't know the other officials, and these are both senior guys, have been around quite a while. And for some reason, during the midst of us kind of shooting this stuff in the locker room, the conversation opened up to politics. And as you know, politics are very, very deeply wedging people's ideologies and so when I'm thinking to myself in the locker room, this is not the place for that. Now I'm looking at you sideways, and I think that, are you trying to tip me over? And so now I'm trying to figure out how to play this, because now I got to go out here and skate with this person who I'm not sure really respects me. And so these things still occur, and that's why these discussions have to happen from the oldest official to the newest official. Because the ones at the top, the ones that have been doing this a while, we kind of forget that we still play a bona fide role in making sure that young have a safe place to do this, because we are losing officials left and right. And I don't know if it's across all the board, but I know in hockey, we can hardly keep them this because of the abuse that we face from coaches and players, but it isn't typically on racial lines.
It's worth waiting to hear you speak.
Thank you.
And you know, when you hear those stories, and we do that, and Chris, you talked about it too. You come in with your partner and breaking the ice. How do we break the ice? How do we fit in? Or are we allowed to fit in? And what kind of things do we do to ourselves to be self-deprecating in order to fit in? Anthony, I know you've been waiting, and I don't want to disregard you. Please speak, my friend.
I think to contextualize racial microaggressions, that they're brief, commonplace, daily verbal behaviors, environmental indignities, whether they're intentional or not, whether the purpose is to harm or is not. They communicate hostile, derogatory, negative racial slights that are subtle insults, stereotypes, or making assumptions. I could tell stories as well when I wrestled for Michigan State about the very few other Black wrestlers. One was from Chicago. If somebody couldn't find their shoes, where's the Black kid from Chicago? He must have stole my shoes. There was a kid from Puerto Rico. Some of you might know is Olympian now. Did he do it? I had a guy ask me about the dorm I lived in, and it's called the Black dorm. And did they serve chicken and watermelon every day? Ha ha ha. And these kind of things happen. So I just wanted to contextualize what they were, but I think Rico did a good job. And I think that, again, it goes back to the training, to being more receptive. There are different ways, as you said, to break the ice and get to know people, whether it is, as Chris said, racialized or not. It could be age-wise. You could be a young official and you got a couple of veteran guys who know each other well. It's just about being inclusive, watching what you say. And being inclusive means not just not saying stereotypical or making assumptions based on race. It could be other things about ability, about time as an official, and to just be polite. I think that a lot of what we're talking about goes back to training and leadership, and these things should be common discussions.
Very good, very good. Go ahead, Mike.
I think what we've tried to let our people know, and the ones that I've been involved with, is don't try to be funny. More often than not, way too many of these microaggressions and your intent is to be funny, and you're just not. You know, the people on TV are funny. You know, I watch David Chappelle. He's funny, and he doesn't care who you are. He insults everybody. The difference with me doing that was I turned the channel on and I picked him. That was who I picked to watch. When we get in a locker room, whether it's 2 of us or 3 of us or 7 of us, somebody's trying to be funny, it's not funny. So if you could just stop the comedian part, maybe just ask a real question like, How's it going? How's your family? Hey, heard you just had a baby. How's everything going? How's your wife? How's your daughter? Any of that stuff. Do a little research. You know, go on Facebook. Find out who you're refereeing with. Everyone's on Facebook. You can find out something that's happened to them and bring it up in the locker room. There's a lot of things that we can do that are positive, and being funny is generally not the one that we should pick.
And it's interesting, when you have more than one person in a group, and again, we talked about this earlier, so someone is being funny, what are the rest of the folks doing? Are they complicit by being silent? Or are they addressing it? What's their comfort level? Are they concerned that they might get ostracized, may not get an assignment, because when it gets back, oh man, I mean, he's a downer. He doesn't understand it. We're just being funny. I joke with folks like this all the time. It goes back again to, you don't know me. You don't know me. You don't know what my sensitivities are. You don't know what my feelings are. You don't, I like what you said, you chose to watch this. That's your choice. But for someone to just decide that you will be my audience, no, I don't subscribe to that. Let me slip back. You talked about the N-word.
Yes.
All right? And it's a divisive word in our society. And it's derived from the pre-Jim Crow period. Everybody knows that, where white people banned, African Americans with the term and used it to abuse and belittle them for decades. We all know that. And the word represents generations of maltreatment and disrespect towards African Americans. However, over time, the word has reemerged and is used in different meanings by descendants of the very people who had to endure the cruel and term for decades. Now, depending on the context, the N-word can be interpreted as either friendly or derogatory. Friendly when used, and it may be in a black community, or derogatory when used by non-black folks. So with that kind of background, look, the questioner says this. It's clear that the N-word should never be condoned or permitted from white players. But this seems to be a more nuanced issue amongst the black community. Should use of this epithet always result in a penalty or disqualification, regardless of who says it, who they say it to, and the context in which they say it? Should this always result? Debbie, go for it, girl.
Okay. In the sport of swimming, I'm not going to find this. In the sport of volleyball, maybe. But in the sport of track, I hear it all the time. This is how I personally approach it. If I hear a group of young people calling each other a N-word, because it's different, it's a different term that they are using. It's actually a term of endearment to each other. I many times say to them, I don't feel comfortable hearing this word. I don't feel comfortable. I grew up in an integrated school. My first coaching experience was with an integrated group of children. My perception of the N-word through history was a negative word. My perception now of the N-word used by young people is not in the same context as it was when I was growing up. I understand that, but I do question them. I say, what if I said that word? And I love the feedback I get. Well, you can't say that word. Why can't I say that word? Not that I would ever do it. And they explain to me why, because I'm white. And sometimes my humor comes in and goes, really? And they'll look at me and say, what do you mean? Am I? Or are you only seeing the outside of me? I try to use it as a teaching moment. But what I get from it is, if they are clear on why they're saying this word, then I don't have any problem of it as far as being against the Michigan High School athletic rule of unsportsmanlike conduct. There's the factor. What is unsportsmanlike conduct? For a black person to say that to another black person, is that unsportsmanlike? You You have to look at the whole situation immediately. But if you have a crowd calling people from the bleachers or from the field to a group of kids, or another player on the field who is white calling it to a black child, that is racist. That is an unsportsmanlike conduct, and the rule should be implemented. That's my opinion. Could be wrong.
I'm not. But I think that you would speak to something you've always taught me, which is about the spirit of the rule. And how you interpret this based on that teaching, the spirit of the rule.
When you hear that, and you hear the youngsters speaking to one another, are we perpetuating it? Are we perpetuating hate? Are we perpetuating ignorance? Are we perpetuating intolerance? Is it okay? Hearing from one official, contextually, if there's no harm meant, if there's no malice, if it appears to be accepted in a positive way, positive spirit, saying no harm, no foul based on MHSAA. What if those same folks within their own group are using that word, but angry when using it? The play didn't go right. You didn't pick when you were supposed to pick. And you stupid end, what's your problem? Okay? Not okay.
I don't think it'd be any different. Let me back up. It is different because it is racially motivated. But I don't think it would be any different than if they chose another derogatory, MFer, if you will. So to back up a little bit, if I hear players using it as a term of endearment, if you will, I may at the next opportunity, hey guys, let's pick choose something else to call each other tonight. Because I don't know how my other two partners, I don't know how a coach may perceive that and want to raise issue with it while I'm quote unquote allowing it to happen. And if you exchange that word for another term that would meet the definition of unsporting, what's the difference? So if we step in potentially in those positive uses of it, hey, guys, do me a favor tonight, just find a different word to use. I don't want to hear it, okay? And try to hopefully prevent the bigger issue from happening that you just brought up, Sam.
And I think what you will find is that there is a lot of controversy here, whether you have a Harvard professor over here or a University of Cincinnati about to be doctor, in terms of whether or not it's okay for the word to be used, whether it's in a joking, a familial way, or whether it's in an aggressive, attacking way, that in some circles, and that's why this is one of those real difficult situations. In some circles, it doesn't matter. It's not appropriate, it's offensive, it's derogatory. You shouldn't have taken this cruel, nasty word and turned it into something sweet and lovely. It should stay the way it was and should never be used, period. And in other situations, hey, okay, it's something that we have taken that was negative and turned some of that negativeness into something very positive and become a kind of familial term, and it's okay to use. The controversy is there. Rico.
One thing I would say that's important in our role as leaders, and we're actually educators to some extent. We can't obviously coach the game while we're part of it, but I think it's important to maybe address these things with a coaching staff, because the bottom line is, okay, so these kids are using this term of endearments, but when they're a sporting game, this is an official, sanctioned event. So in life, you're going to have to go to official sanctioned events, whether it be your job or whatever, and you can't utilize those types of terminology and get away with it because it's just not acceptable. So when do we start teaching them? After they're out here struggling to get in the roles, and because we've allowed them to use that type of terminology, it's actually inhibiting some and keeping them back some, because we're utilizing a word the way it was never intended to be used and making it, like you said, warm and fuzzy. I don't know how that happened, to be honest with you. I do try to explain it like on these courageous conversations I have with the OHL players, because the question has come to me from them: how come in a hip hop song the term is used, but when I say it outside of that, all of a sudden it's taboo? And without going through that whole history lesson that I give them, I talk about the reclamation of the word and how it came in conjunction with the civil rights movement, and then some of the events of the late 60s, that all of a sudden there's this revolution that happened, and that's when the reclamation happened, and then it turned into a term of endearment through comedians first, and then ultimately through mainstream hip hop. My ultimate question to those players after I give them all that information is, what is your agenda? What purpose do you really have to say a word like that? So that helps out on that side, but from the other side, how do I let them know that it's a term of endearment? It's just something, I can't explain why it's okay. And so somehow we have to take control of that and say, when you're here in this environment, that's not a term that we want to hear you use.
An excellent point there in terms of what is it that you hope to get out of using this word? How does that enhance what does it do for you in terms of your comfort, that you're being more accepted or acceptable? What are you getting out of using the term? Let me slip real quick into the other question that was, what if you hear an official use the word? How do you address that?
As a term of endearment towards one another, or during the course of the game? I want to know how
the questioner didn't exactly say that, but
so we can leave it alone.
I would suggest that they were talking about something in more of a derogatory form. How would you address that?
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable to the point where that's, to me, that would be a violation of the code of ethics and a suspendable offense in reality. I think part of the problem we have with the word, I mean, and I'm 63, so it's like, yeah, I grew up and saw all the race riots and all that stuff, and so I know what I think of the word. In my world, I think that's an ejection when I hear it in a contest.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, 2 years ago, the NCAA men's basketball put in a rule that said you do not eject when that word is used. You may penalize, but then the coaches want the young man to be on the bench with them so that they can have the teachable moment and deal with that right then and there. So interesting, because in my world, that was, it didn't matter. That was an ejection, period. No matter who said it. Whether, and it's like now, it's like, does it end in A? If it ends in A, it can be said, or it's affectionate or whatever. If it ends in R, that's the bad one. But we still, you have an environment, and Sam, you talked about one of the first questions about the great equalizer. Sports is the equalizer. Well, at the end of the day, you have people there that are coming to watch their kids play, people there that are watching just because they're from that town and that's what they do. And to subject them to some of the things that they would end up, that word being one of them, it just leaves way too much for interpretation. Now, I think the point was made that if you think that it's not being used racially or whatever, you can get to them and say, hey, dude, pick a different word. Yeah, I think we've gotten to the point where, from a training standpoint, and maybe that's when we start talking to each other, that's where we can, you can educate me, Sam, on the things that I can do and or say to be able to get to the black kid that says it, and he's got some respect for how I'm trying to deal with it. But boy, it's a word that for the most part, I don't think is acceptable at this point yet in an athletic environment. Interesting that, the kids, running track, they're probably sitting around waiting for their event. Who knows, they might be sitting there for a couple of hours waiting for their event to go.
Yes.
So that's no longer an athletic event to them. That's just hanging out time.
That's right.
Well, that doesn't happen in a basketball game, you know, although maybe the kids on the end of the bench may use it because they're, you know, they're just hanging out and that's what they are. You know, kids that don't play as often as possible, or same thing with the football team, the ones that don't play. But man, I just think leaving it up to interpretation is way too slippery of a slope for most of us to have to deal with.
We've gone long, and I want to be very mindful of it. Okay, thank you, Brent. You got a couple more questions, and we could stick on one. I think we'd be here for a long time, and one of the things that I'm excited about is that there's an audience that will get to hear you. And I hope it's one of those things where they take it and, quote, put it on the DVD and play it often, and play it with some friends around, and then have some discussion about the discussions that took place, because that's the only way we're going to address it. And we could talk more and more about the appropriate or inappropriate use of the N-word and whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable. I have some points of view on it that will probably take a little bit longer to address than what we have here, and I don't want to dominate this thing, but thank you for your comments. But I want to share just a couple more things with you. An experiment by Northwestern University professors Robert Livingston and Erica Hall tested how participants would penalize a black football player and a white football player for committing the same act. Each player would score a touchdown and then celebrate. Now, where the participants would be asked how arrogant they perceived each player to be and how much they would compensate each player. The results showed that while each player was perceived to be equally arrogant, participants were far more likely to give a significant financial bonus to the white player than the black player. The question that the questioner put in is, as a white official, I sometimes feel that I actually give the benefit of the doubt to minority players in many situations to avoid the appearance of racial bias. Can the panel speak to whether this is something that they've heard others do and whether this might be balanced by the opposite occurring implicitly? Give benefit of the doubt to minority players to balance.
I think it's hard to say if it balances, because in this situation, we have to be addressing the bias ahead of time. And that means that we are recognizing it. And that's something that we've already discussed. I mean, clearly by some of these questions, people are not sure about the bias going on. Some may be, but it seems like a lot aren't. And I just want to return to what I said earlier about the spirit of the rule. And the rule should not be different across competition levels. And it shouldn't be different for different races. Because if you are going to give the benefit of the doubt to the minority kid, now you're being biased against the white player. So you're just causing a problem no matter what. So in the spirit of integrity, in the spirit of the rule, you should call the call straight down the line.
Excellent. Go ahead, Mike.
When I read this question, Sam, the thing that I think I'd like to ask the person that asked it is, if it's, are we talking about like plays? So I'm ruling differently on different plays that happen during the game? Because if that's the case, I would tell you, I don't know that there's a lot of us that are that good. I mean, the kid's coming in a basketball game, the kid's coming into the paint 100 miles an hour, and I got to decide block, charge. If there's another whistle someplace else, if I happen to work a little college basketball, I got to decide restricted area or not restricted area. Is the ball out of the hand, not in the hand? And I got to remember either what color they are or who I do or do not like. If it's that, I don't know that that's the part that's happening. What I think potentially happens is, yeah, for me, if I'm the white guy and you know, I've gone down and worked a couple times in the Detroit area, a couple of basketball games, actually was called an interloper by Mitch, or not Mitch, by Mick McCabe, for coming down there and refereeing. Yeah, so maybe it becomes, if I'm the white guy, maybe I turn my head a little bit with the black coach so I don't recognize him, so I don't have to deal with him, so I don't get called a racist because I've dealt with them. Yeah, I can see that potentially happening, without a doubt. Or we just talked about it. You hear the N-word. And now as a white guy, I hear the N-word and I don't know what to do. I'm not trained. I know that, now I hear it in, my kids' music, and I know that now there's a difference between it ending in A and ending in R, but I don't quite know enough about the difference to know what to do. Will I turn my head away from that so I don't have to deal with it? Yeah, I can see that happen. But I don't know if it's necessarily got anything to do with the racial bias part, or it's just the fact that I don't know how to deal with it. Because no one's trained me. We haven't had those conversations, which we need to have. And it's interesting because one of the things that came up in our discussion with our association was our black officials said, we need to come in and start talking to the white officials when you go in and work the inner city game, that you're the only one that's white on the court. And how to deal with that. I'm not gonna know that. But if I can get some help from my black brothers in the family, or my black sisters in the family, that's great, because now when those things happen, now I do have some knowledge, and now I can deal with them appropriately. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's always got to be with a penalty. It can be with just making the statement, hey, young man, that's not a word that I'm comfortable with, and if I'm not comfortable, I need you to stop using it.
Tiffany, what do you think?
I'm thinking so many things. So one of the things I'm thinking about is how often race is ascribed. So are we looking at the kids on the court and going, okay, that one is black, that one is multiracial, so I'm not really sure. That one looks like maybe biracial. So it's important for us to be careful about ascribing people their identity. And that's what I have a problem with that question. And even the one earlier about, well, what if this child says and this child doesn't? Well, are you gonna go through a roster of everybody's racial identity? So we have to really be careful of how we ascribe race to people and allow them to self-identify. So that is the part of the question that really bothers me. So that's kind of what I was thinking about.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Let's move on and start to bring some closure to this, because some of the questions that were presented have been kind of morphed, and so we've kind of answered those. But I do want to have us talk about one right now. It says the current percentage of minority officiating high school sports across the state of Michigan breaks down as follows. Approximately 9% of the MHSA registered officials are African American, 0.5 Native American, 2% Hispanic, and 1.5 listed as other. What do panel members believe is the best way to increase officiating numbers for people of color? Additionally, does the panel believe that the increase in officials of color will have an impact on real or perceived racial bias in high school sports? So, number one, how do you increase the numbers? But increasing the numbers, do you believe that that in and of itself will have an impact on real or perceived racial bias in high school sports? I saw Rico go.
As far as I know, I'm the only black ice hockey official in MHSA. There's 4 of us. Is that correct? Thank you. I've not met the other 3, so that tells you that how distant we are from one another. Okay, so with that being said, in our particular sport, there's many groups that are working hard to create opportunities for kids who typically are non-traditional hockey kids, so inner city kids, urbanized center kids. And the idea is to get them involved in the sport at low cost, that big barrier that is up in our sport. That's the main barrier. And the long-term goal of it, like I run the Flint Inner City Youth Hockey Program in Flint, and it introduces the sport to kids so they can learn the sport for free. And in fact, I bring high school hockey teams into our practices. They're our volunteers of the week. And what we're doing with that is we're creating this cultural balance. So all the kids are from the inner city. Most of them are black kids or Hispanic or BIPOC kids, we'll call them that, as opposed to anything else. Most of them are on a lower socioeconomic level. And then the kids from the high school are all from the suburbs or rural sections of our county. And so when they come in, they're coming from where they're from in the suburbs to the city, and all of a sudden they have to work with kids that don't look like them, that don't talk like them. They have to put a helmet, I've witnessed this, it's crazy, a helmet on a little girl who has thick braids that come all the way down her back, and they're trying to squeeze this helmet off, and you can see them just nervous about it. And I prep the high school players before I say, I do not want you to look at these participants like they're poor little kids from Flint. They're just kids who maybe don't look like you, they just want the same opportunity that you were provided, right? So when you go out there, give them the best face of ice hockey. And so when it all happens, it's a beautiful marriage. I didn't expect it that way, that's how it happened. So what we're trying to do is foster the youth in our sport, particularly the BIPOC youth in our sport, to grasp hold of the sport and say, this is something that you can do, and then look for these other avenues. I tell people all the time in our sport that you will go much further as a hockey official than you ever will as a player, right? So I've done semifinal games. I played one season in high school hockey, and I was a 4th plus liner. So that means I was all the way to the bench, and we didn't make it out of regional. So I would have never had the opportunity without giving myself an opportunity, making it for myself and saying, I can do this. So to answer your question, how do you recruit more? I can't tell you specifically for our sport other than we're working on it, and it's going to be a long, long road.
Well, it sounds like you're doing something pretty outstanding the way you're doing it right now.
Thank you.
In terms of bringing, I love the marriage or the enhanced relationship that's taking place there. And then, but also I'm hearing your commentary, that person that's having the difficulty getting that helmet on, you know, don't look at the long braids or the dreads or whatever,
Right.
you know, look at the fact that they want to be on the ice. They want to do what you are doing, what you've had the opportunity to do and experience to do, and just having those conversations. We talked about this earlier. The conversations are really important, and we as the mentors within our different sports as officials, having those conversations, bringing those youngsters along, stopping some of the uncomfortable with that word, whether or not we're getting into freedom of speech or whatever, uncomfortable with that word. It doesn't really belong in the sport. It doesn't do for us. I love it. What do you hope to get from using that word? And if you're not getting any real benefit from it, let's find another word. And if we don't have more officials, and I think you're an excellent example. Yes, you can be the Lone Ranger for a long time in the sport and be successful at it and break some barriers, but then pull some people along with you. So, great response. Anybody else want to respond to that one before I bring up the last question and get us out of here? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we've tried to do around here is we try to recruit out of Michigan State. When the kids come to Michigan State, we've got a relationship with the intramural department over there. And he also is part of the association, and we do make a real effort to recruit minorities and to recruit females. I mean, I had lunch with 3 women today that referee high school and college basketball here in the area. And when we got done and everybody went their separate ways, I was sitting with the one lady and I said, we need more women. I think women talking to other women are the best way to recruit. I think a black official talking to another black person is probably the best way to recruit. So you've got to get success stories with the ones that you currently have and give them the tools and make it fun and the opportunity to do, you know, like with our association, we try to do social things as well. So it's not just showing up at the game and the little bit of interaction we have there and then we go home. We try to do some things socially so we learn about each other. But it's critical that we continue. You know, I remember putting 5 black football officials on a local game here in Lansing. It was all black kids. My intent when doing that was that somebody in the stands, even if it's just one, a little brother or an older brother, if somebody that's playing looks out there and sees that there are black people officiating. There are 5 black guys officiating that game. That looks like fun. Maybe I could do something like that. So we have to recruit everybody quite honestly. And we tell everybody, you know, you got to recruit within your business, you know, within your work environment, find somebody in there. But I completely agree with the fact that it has to be something that we do with intent. I mean, we need minority officials without question. We need female officials without question. And if we don't do it with intent, it's not going to get done. Same thing with, you know, interesting how the fact that, you know, a little bit of politics stuff was mentioned earlier. Well, now that we're not, you know, electing a president and everything's crazy on TV, my fear is that some of the things that have happened over the last 16 months, now no one cares about. And we should. We got to keep having these conversations all the time. The group that I just had last weekend, I gave them a homework assignment, and I said, go home, pick up the phone, get on a Zoom with somebody that doesn't look like you. And just, that's what I started doing, and just ask the question, tell me what I need to know. Tell me how I can be a better partner on my crew. Tell me how I can be a better assigner. Tell me how I can just be a better person. So we can't let this go away. We've got to keep this up front. We've got to have this panel discussion constantly. To be honest with you, it'd be great if we could have them monthly, in my opinion, because I think we'd end up getting a lot more people involved in officiating, because they wouldn't be afraid to
What a
deal with it.
beautiful segue
Yeah.
into my last question. And the questioner asks this: what are the panel's thoughts on mandatory training by MHSAA officials on implicit bias? What are the perceived benefits, downsides, or obstacles to such training? So, mandatory training. We can talk about it this way: these mandatory conversations about what do you think are the perceived benefits, downsides, and obstacles to such a training? This is our final question, so we'll give everyone an opportunity if you want to. Anthony?
Yes, sir.
The only downside is something that Brent brought up, which is a logistical standpoint and being difficult. But I think that if you have an expert that is willing to travel to facilitate these things, I think it's very doable. I think it should be mandatory, and I think that the benefits are vast. I think that, so I'm thinking back to a few comments that were made about language and stuff. And I think that it will bring, not only would it help people with their maybe internalized biases or internalized racism, their colorblind racism, it would help people realize that they may be forcing their own ideologies, their own beliefs on other people. Would help officials be more accepting of other beliefs, and not that we only have to come from a Eurocentric standpoint. Mike mentioned something about, what do you do? Or yeah, Mike, what do you do when the black crowd or the black coaches automatically think that you're against them? Well, if you have training that teaches you that black males specifically, but black people generally have been dealing with racism, and their experiences lead them to be angry at you for no reason, except for institutionalized racism. They assume that you're going to treat them poorly. So the benefits of this training will help you have those conversations. If a coach does explicitly call you racist, it will help you know the language that you can use. It will help you with maybe the things that you can say during a pre-meet, a pre-game, a pre-match. And it will help you probably deal with your day-to-day life, because now you'll have tools to deal with implicit racial bias and racism.
Thank you, Anthony. Mike? Benefit?
Well, I think there'd be a lot of benefits. I think just education, period. And the way I look at it, I think not only from an officiating standpoint, but just in your day-to-day, just being a better person. I talked to a brand new official tonight that has just moved into the area and wants to do some refereeing. And it was funny because I said, hey, I gotta go because I'm doing this panel. And you could already tell the uncomfort level at the other end of the phone when I mentioned what it was that I was about to talk about. And I said, look, man, you and I gotta have conversations like this. I said, I don't expect to change the world, but you know what? I can change a little bit. I can maybe make my 2 children better at this. I said, you just said that you've got a newborn. Hey, you know what? Maybe you can make yours better at this. And maybe 100 years down the road, I'm not gonna be around, but maybe we're not having these discussions as much as we're having them now. Mandatory, mandatory scares me a little bit because from an officiating standpoint, if we're gonna make a mandatory with me comes with, okay, what's the penalty? So now we're saying, man, we can't find referees and we can't, we're not gonna be able to, because there are places where they either can't play games or they're changing days that they play. So making it mandatory scares me a little bit. What I'd like to see us do is I'd like to see us make it something that people want to learn about. Make it something that, the association, because I know most of the stuff goes through the association that the association gets excited about. So have that group be the one that reaches out to their own officials in their association and puts it out there that this is a good thing for them to get involved in. So if again, I'm not opposed to doing the mandatory thing, but my question is going to be, what's the penalty? And if the penalty is you can't referee, and again, we can go around and round and round because you can say, well, if they're biased, we don't want them to referee. Yeah, but as the guy that's trying to fill assignments, the AD doesn't care about that in all reality. I hate to say it that way, but they just give me the games and they expect officials to be on the games. They don't care how I get them. They're not overly concerned about any bias of any kind. They certainly don't want me to send them racists, which I certainly am not going to do. But I think it would be great to offer it, but I think we got to figure out a way to do it from the standpoint of, hey, this is going to benefit you. This is going to make you, quite honestly, a better person. And that's what I've been trying to, share with the groups that I've spoken with. This is about, officiating. It's changing. We used to say that from an officiating standpoint, it used to be, it was the brotherhood. I'm sitting next to an official. It's not the brotherhood anymore. You can't say brotherhood because that's impactful to her. It's now the family. And we can't say three, the books that you go back and look at were 3-man mechanics. It's not 3-man anymore. It's 3-person mechanics or 7-person mechanics. So I'd love to see us, I don't see a downside, to be honest with you, Sam, trying to do it, other than if we make it mandatory, what's the penalty? That's the only downside I see. Because you know what? If we get 2 people talking about this, we've won. Because then they're hopefully going to talk to 2 people, or they're going to go back and go, hey, you should have seen what I just saw, or you should have taken part of what I just took part in. Because I think we've got good stuff to give them.
Debbie, any insight?
Well, I can piggyback on a lot of what Michael said. Again, the key word here is mandatory. Do I feel it's very, very important? Absolutely. Probably our most important concept that we should address. But if we don't have the backing, what is the penalty? Everybody wants to know the penalty. What's the penalty if I say this word? What's the penalty if I allow this to happen in a match? What's the penalty? If I write a report, is it going to be taken care of? I have a bunch to say about that, but when we say we want to recruit more, yes, we do want to recruit more. But not only recruit them, but train them, and also put them in training positions. We've had the same trainers forever in this state, in most of our sports. We need new trainers too. We need to look at what we have. If we only have 9% of Michigan High School Athletic Association, 9% black, we have 15.9% just in our association. And in our association, those members, like I, are trained. I also talked to 9 of them before I came to this meeting on telling me what things have occurred during your time, whether with our association or working in another association. 3 things that came up to me was the person wouldn't shake my hand at the beginning of the game. The other official would not shake his hand at the beginning of the game. Secondly, the AD did not support him when the coach said what was it? The comment was, we're not the right color. This was a white team saying this to a black official. AD didn't support him when he gave the coach a technical foul. AD came up and said, you're wrong, you can't do that. He said, you weren't the right color jersey. That's unsportsmanlike too. He followed the rules. I had a female official that was told that she could not be the up official, she had to be the down official, just because I'm sure you haven't played the game. So we're not preparing our black officials in our associations how to handle this either. It's not just training our white officials, it's training our black officials how to handle it in a situation that may occur. I mean, what support has Rico had in preparing himself to go into a locker room filled with all white officials and hearing a racist joke? In my career, I've heard a lot of racist jokes about who I am, what I am, and so it needs to be addressed. You need to be prepared. You need to be educated. We need to be able to teach every official how to handle disrespect from the parents, from the athletes, from the coaches, and from the athletic directors or the administration who's there supposed to be guarding this game. So do I think the training is necessary? Absolutely. Do I think it can be mandatory? Again, Michigan High School Athletic has to take the stance on that. And the penalty has to be clear. And if we lose officials for that, then we need to teach a broader group of people and bring them into officiating. If the officials we have don't want to comply with it, maybe we need to turn over the rocks and get different people that will comply with it. Those housewives that their kids are grown and they think that they play and maybe they want to get back into it. Reach out to them. But no, we're told they're not athletic looking enough. They're old. Are you sure they know the game?
Rico?
I'll briefly say this, that we're going through, in my opinion, a societal evolution, and we don't have space to wait to see what everyone's going to do. We are leaders in each of our sport areas. No matter who we are as officials, the game doesn't happen without us. So that means that we have to dig deeper than anybody to work through implicit biases and our microaggressions and all the other things that we've discussed tonight. And we can't do it by saying, hey, I'm offering you this, because we know, if you're saying, for a lot of people, you say, hey, there's this training, you want to go to it, or this opportunity to learn, you want to go to it, and it's about implicit bias. As you indicated just earlier, it throws up flags for some people that are just unclear and unsure. If you give out people an opportunity to really crack the egg open, see what's in there, and go, oh wow, I did not realize this. I think by offering an opportunity and saying, and tying it and hinging it to the educational portion of getting certified each year, I don't think that it's a bad road to say, hey, this is part of, I have to do a pre-season test. It should be a part of that, and some link to that. And with the virtual world that we've created over a year, I think logistically it can happen. And I mean, just listening to Anthony talk, I've learned stuff just sitting here. And so this is, there's no reason for us to say, well, we're in this pocket of the UP. Hey, now we're here. The time is now. And if we don't take opportunities and go beyond this panel discussion and say, let's take what we're learning and bring it to the masses so that everybody understands. I want to make it clear, our sport is becoming more diverse in players, right? I see more BIPOC players across the landscape. Not in every section of the state, particularly downstate. I don't see more BIPOC coaches, and I only didn't even know there was 3 other BIPOC referees. So I want to make it clear that when we talk about these things, yep. So in hockey, does this stuff matter? Maybe it doesn't seem like it does as much, but as we said earlier, we're first people, and if we don't give the right example as people, how can we ever be leaders as coaches and officials?
Thank you, Rico. Chris?
I'll try to keep it short and sweet, kind of wrapping up here and sort of echoing a lot of the thoughts that have already been shared. I think that from a lot of the things that we've heard tonight, we've heard some of these insults or some of these derogatory comments coming from the sideline, from a coach, from an administrator. And if we want our officials to be the best representation of the MHSA on the court, we also need to hold our coaches and administrators to that same level. And if it's something that the MHSA wants to pursue in this arena, then I think that the coaches and administrators need to be brought on board as well, so that there's one cohesive unit out there and we start to build a better understanding amongst the ranks.
Thanks, Chris. Saving the last for the best, or the best for the last, or?
I hope so.
All right, Tiffany.
So I think we started the conversation by saying that this might be one of the most important topics. So if it's one of the most important topics, then why would we make it mandatory? And I think our students, our kids, our athletes, that's the asset. So we have to keep them in mind, right? They are the ones that we have to center our discussion on. So if the reason why we're not going to make it mandatory is about us, then I have a problem with that. So we have to keep the main thing, and that's our student athletes. The second thing is, I heard a lot of talk about, recruiting and how do we recruit, but how do we retain? So we can recruit all we want to, but if people don't want to stay, then that's an issue. So that goes back to that belonging piece. So we have to make sure that we can go out and recruit and have all these folks come in, but if we don't create an environment where they want to stay, then that's not going to be helpful. So I just want to add that piece in there.
The panel has been outstanding. Done a very good job of answering questions, very thoughtful, very deliberative, and very insightful, and probing. And we certainly appreciate everyone being here. Anthony, you from a long distance, we appreciate you being here. And I'm going to go out on the limb and kind of put the MHSA on the spot to say that since we did say that this is the most important, we've reinforced, then we're going to continue to move forward with this, however this show, on the road, however, we do need to do something. We presented something, and it's a penalty thing, but for coaches and coaches and players who are ejected now have to take a sportsmanship course through the National Federation. They have to take that course if they want to play. Can't say that that's what's going to happen to the officials, but could we provide something so that when they are registering, the conversation needs to begin, at least begin. And I know I'm putting director of sports without having that conversation with him, or director of officials, but it's possible to put together a little something to at least begin that conversation. It certainly is through us working with the associations and the assigners to present them with something so that this conversation is out there. If we leave it after an hour and a half tonight and say, job done, we're going to be right back where we started, if not farther back. Outstanding from the panel. On behalf of the Michigan High School Association and Brent Rice, thank you. And to those of you out there, you have a part to do. You have a part to do. Get involved. Thank you.